It's Founders Day weekend again, and here at Island Grove Park there is another Civil War encampment and battle reenactment happening this weekend. Now last year we showed you the Battle of Antietam Bridge, the whole narrative of that battle, so you could see how it went from start to finish. This year we thought we'd like to show you how the soldiers actually lived in their encampments while they were on the march. So we will be going from place to place to the different divisions, artillery, cavalry, infantry, and even some medical and other hangers-on, people that followed the camps doing other things to help support the troops. So let's take a little walk and start and talk with some of them now.
Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah. We'll give him a hearty welcome, them, hurrah, hurrah. The boys will cheer and the men will shout and the ladies, they will all turn out and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. The old church bell will peal with joy.
It's early morning in the encampment. We're here with the artillery battery, and you are?
Corbin's Battery. My name is First Lieutenant Greg Webster, and I'm the commander of Corbin's Battery.
Okay, now you have just finished doing some drilling with your people. This is getting ready for the upcoming battle.
Right, we like to be well trained and right up to date, so we're as efficient as we can be in the battle this afternoon.
Okay, now what is the plan for the battle for the artillery?
Well, we're going to be back behind the enemy lines, probably shooting over their heads with a spherical case, a spherical shell, trying to put down the enemy infantry and even put their cannon out of position as well, out of commission as well if we can.
Okay, so their cannon will also be behind their lines, right?
Right, it'll be back behind their lines over towards their camp. Yep.
So it'll be kind of shooting in at an angle, trying to pick up their artillery? Or pick up?
As straight on as we possibly can, but enfilade fire is always best.
Okay, so what happens, once things get going? You do this shelling for a while because that always happens before the charge. Do you stop firing after the charge?
Only so we don't injure our own troops. If they get close enough, we may have to stop firing. If space opens up again and we can fire safely, we'll pick it up again. As if the enemy starts coming closer, we can switch from shell to canister and start taking out their front ranks as they would have done in the real battle.
Okay, now what are you using for your primary weapon today?
It's a 12-pound mountain howitzer.
Okay, that was basically the same howitzer as last year?
Right. We also have a 12-pound Cohorn mortar. I may start the battle with one round from that, but I only have limited cannoneers today to operate just one piece.
And that actually, compared to the howitzer, it looks kind of like a toy.
It is, but that is a full-size Cohorn mortar, and they were used during the Civil War, first at Petersburg. They had a battery of 6 Cohorn mortars that shelled into the lines at Petersburg. Yeah.
Was a howitzer used with a solid shot, or was that with an exploding shot?
They were mostly known as shell guns. They could fire solid shot, but they were prone to flipping over with the back pressure. So they didn't fire solid shot too regularly. Most of it was spherical case or spherical shell. And if the enemy got close, we'd fire canister as well.
Okay, so you'd be more likely to have an exploding shell come out of the mortar than not?
Oh, with the mortar it would be all shells, correct. With the howitzer it would be exploding shells or canister, yeah. Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we're going to take a look and see what kind of gear they have in their encampment. Still here in the artillery campsite, and you are?
I'm Jennifer Tote.
And your rank?
Sergeant.
Sergeant. Sergeant, you have quite a setup here for your campsite. Why don't we just kind of talk a little bit about some of the gear that you have here?
Well, we're a military unit and we shoot cannons, but there's still the everyday stuff that you have to do. So we have some things here that we use, typical for every day in the world. We've got cups and so forth, and we need a washing station after we eat. So that's what we have here, and then our rinsing station. And this is where we do our living.
Okay, now I like this table because it's got a hole cut out that you can sit the wash
Yeah,
basin
shall
in,
I-
so it
shall I
doesn't
demonstrate?
slide all over the place,
That's right, right here. See?
Yep.
There you go. No, it works great.
Okay, what about this?
This is just typical stuff. There are little scrubbies in here and sponges and things like that, and everything that we need. We have a fire. We create hot water, and then we put it in here along with our soap. And same thing in the rinsing station. We can put hot water in there and wash our dishes just as easily as we could if we were at home.
Now, how do you manage to pack all this stuff with you when you're marching from site to site?
Well, we don't. We can't pack all this up and take it with us. This is more than you'd have if you were, I assume, on the move a little bit more. But when we have our horse and wagon, then we can put all this on there.
Okay, so that is the answer to the question there, horse and wagon.
That's right. Horse and wagons will get everything where we need it to go.
Because there are always people on the outskirts of these camps who were providing other services, and drovers would have been one of them.
That's right, and there are sutlers that would follow the people, and camp fowlers, can't say that word, who would do laundry, and you could get a sutler to sell you the things that you'd need for camp life.
Do we have any of the sutlers here, or any of the others, do you know?
Not this weekend, no.
Oh, okay, so why don't we move around? We'll have to go around to the other end of the tent here, and we'll see what you've got over there.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, Sarge, now what we have here is something for the men to clean themselves up with.
That's right. So this time period, washing your hands was not a really big thing. This is just about the time they're getting to realize that washing hands are important. But modern day people, we like to be clean, so we do. And we don't have a constant source of water here. So we've got one bucket where you stick your hands in and use with a soap, and then the other one is for water only.
So this wouldn't have been among the gear that was being hauled from place to place by a drover?
Probably not, no.
Probably not. Hence the need for the U.S. Sanitary Commission.
Exactly. And they really were very important during this time because they were enlightening the soldiers. As we all know, a lot of people died from dysentery when they were close together. So we're not going to do that. We're not going to reenact that.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. And dysentery, sepsis, and a lot of other things like that.
Yes, many things like that, yeah.
Especially, the kind of lead poisoning that happened in this time.
Right, things that they did not know about. Yeah, mercury poisoning and so forth with medicine. So, yeah, for sure. So we do that here. And again, this is our living area. So we have our table and our chairs and everything that we need to do our living.
And the company is busy behind us, just kind of taking things easy until they get called to move the...
For sure. For sure. We always try to relax in between. There's a lot that goes on once we get started. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're
Now,
welcome.
let's take a look at the tents and see what kind of gear personal gear the soldiers had with them. Now we're going to take a look at some of the more personal gear that the soldiers used kind of on an everyday basis to do their jobs as soldiers or as gunnery officers here, although you are not a gunnery officer, you're a non-com.
Correct. I am the quartermaster sergeant. Okay. So I'm in charge of finding all the supplies that the lieutenant says, hey, I need this.
And your name?
I'm sorry, my name is Heidi Webster.
Okay, now why don't you show us some of the gear that we have set out over here so that we can take a look at it?
Well, first and foremost, we have a wonderful hammer. It comes in very handy, driving in stakes for the tents, and if anybody happens to get too close, we can always use that too. Also, the soldiers' main way of keeping their personal items with them is a haversack. This particular one has the artillery cannons on it. But imagine fitting your whole life into a bag, as well as all of your food rations for the day as well, including raw meat.
Yeah. And the infantry had it a little bit harder because they had more gear they needed to carry with them. Yep. Whereas your artillery, you don't have to carry those guns with you. You get them hauled by horses.
If we're lucky, yep. The artillery was lucky in that we did have supply wagons because we had so much extra gear that we needed as we went.
Okay, now our other sergeant has a little piece here that we can show a little bit of. Mm-hmm. This is...
Sergeant Tote is our Ordinance Sergeant. So as Ordinance Sergeant, she's in charge of keeping track of all the rounds that we burn, all the primers, how much powder we have, and anything pertaining to the gun going boom.
Yeah, so that means that, like, she will be able to reorder things like fuses, shells, and the shells came through packed all together with the charges attached to them, right?
Not necessarily. A lot of times you get the shells and then you'd have to put the fuse into the shell. And actually on the gun itself, the number 6 person, 6, 7, and 8 that stays back on the limber chest, they would be the ones that actually set the fuse and set the amount of fuse that they wanted in the shells to get the timing right.
From last year's program, we learned a little bit about the wooden sabot that sits between the shell, or the ball, as the case may be, and the powder bag. Were those put together on site, or did they come with that attached?
You had 2 different versions. You had a fixed round that had the sabot in it already, or you had a separate round where you'd have a powder bag loaded and then you'd have the shell loaded after. In that particular instance, you would not necessarily have the sabot. The sabot was only in those fixed rounds that came pre-packaged with the bands over the, they'd actually hold the bands on the shell.
And the amount of powder you used was very important too, because you didn't want to be shooting 2 miles beyond the back lines of the enemy.
Well, that's one of the things. We say the effective distance of the cannon is 1,200, between 9 and 1,200 yards. That's the effective range, not the actual range. Because at the time, we didn't have forward observers with a radio saying, hey, you hit here, you hit here. It was all what we could see line of sight. So hence the effective range as opposed to the actual range. And the bigger guns would reach much further than our little howitzer.
Okay, do we have anything else here?
We have a mirror that the soldiers could have in their tent, as well as a sack coat. You'll notice that the different a sack coat just has 4 buttons going down the front. It's very plain. It was used more near the end of the war because it was much cheaper and easier put together. You will see shell jackets that have all the piping on them. Those were for NCOs and officers. Much more detail-oriented for as you moved up. You'll also notice the different colors on the shell jackets. Red is for artillery, yellow is for cavalry, blue is for infantry, and you'll see green for medical.
Okay, and we have some interesting objects down here on this case.
Well, every soldier is going to have a pocket knife, because that's a given. Every soldier, well, not every soldier, but a lot of soldiers may have a shoe horn because the shoes get interesting to put on after you wear them for miles and miles of marching. We also have a diary in a leather-bound case because at the time, during the Civil War, it was one of the more educated wars at the time. That's why we know so much about it, because everyone kept a diary, everyone kept a journal. So it was a given that the soldiers were going to have something with which to track their experiences of the day.
And it was actually a very common thing for everybody to be doing back then, was keeping some kind of a diary. John Quincy Adams was famous for his.
Yep. There were a lot, like I said, that's how we know what happened specifically with some units. Corbin's battery, we can trace specifically because of letters and diaries as opposed to actual military records, because the military records just weren't there.
Okay, and we have a lantern down there that I have seen one of those before, so I know how that works. You want to pick that up and just kind of show it off a little bit here?
This is a pierced tin lantern. It's one that would be with an officer would have something like this. This isn't the common soldier's one, but you just, it's full of wax. Put your candle in, light it up, and it makes a nice little display. But like I said, we have some regular lanterns over there that would have been used for the general camp.
Those tin pierced ones did shed quite a bit of light, and they were almost impossible for the wind to blow out.
Yeah. You'll also see sashes of different colors as well and different fabrics. As an NCO, I have a cotton sash sash for when I get all dressed up for the big parades. I wear a cotton sash. The officers will have different color sashes in silk. So,
And the colors go along with the units they were in.
as more the rank as opposed to the units. Your sergeant sashes are always going to be red. Captains, lieutenants, and captains all have their colors as well, and I know them off the top of my head.
Well, that gives me some information I didn't have before. Okay, well, thank you so much for giving me a little tour of the campsite.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Oh, and just so you know, in a tent like this, in the wintertime, you would have 6 to 8 men in each tent, as opposed to just 1 or 2.
Well, that would help keep people warm.
That's where spooning comes from.
And I thought it was from General Spooner.
Spoons in a drawer.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, now we are in the cavalry encampment. And we have with us,
Paul Brundage,
and your rank?
Colonel.
A colonel from the cavalry. I almost said it.
You almost.
I almost said
Cavalry.
With the cavalry. Just a hint, next year, guys, get the cavalry spelled as cavalry.
We'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
To talk with us a little bit about what the cavalry's role was in a battle. So you were telling me a couple things earlier about, kind of like the actual pre-fighting kind of stuff that they did?
Yeah, a lot of times we were the eyes and the ears of the Army. So we would go out on scouting missions, either on the flanks of the Army or out front, so that we could give the infantry commanders an idea of what they were facing, whether it was just a small force, whether it was a large force. We would also be used to disrupt, when they would have stuff going to their army, we would intercept their foodstuffs. We would make havoc, on their lines. So instead of them being able to get a good night's sleep, we would go up and down their lines and keep them awake and under arms, and just kind of make a general nuisance of ourselves. In addition to during battles, especially at the beginning of the war, you would have cavalry on cavalry, horsemen on horsemen. And about halfway through the war, it evolved into horses were a means of getting to a place. As opposed to grand charges back and forth, they would use the horses to outrun the infantry. So take, for example, the Battle of the Wilderness, which is what we're going to be portraying tomorrow. The horses were used to get the cavalry there quicker, and we could dismount 75% of our force. So in other words, they would travel in sets of 4s. Number 1 would get down, clip his horse to number 2. Number 2 would clip his horse to number 3. And number 3 would give his lead line of all the horses together to number 4, who would take them to safety. And these guys would fight dismounted on the ground. And this way here, it was a great way to get to a spot quicker than obviously your infantry could march. You could get there at the trot or a canter or a nice gallop, and get there before them to try and block where they were going to go.
So does that mean that the way the movies portray it as the cavalry coming in right across through the front-line infantry is not terribly accurate?
Correct. And the worst thing that you could ever do historic-wise, and I love them to death, but to watch a John Wayne movie, because as much as he's an American hero, oh my goodness, his movies are so inaccurate. Now, things have gotten better from Glory and Gods and Generals. There's just several movies that are wonderful. But as far as pre-1990s, not even close to being accurate, neither in what the horsemen did, even to their uniforms, or even to their weapons. Just completely inaccurate.
Even that major film for Audie Murphy that got him started, The Red Badge of Courage, which was supposed to be fairly accurate, it didn't have the cavalry. The cavalry still shouldn't have been charging through the lines.
Mostly inaccurate. I'll give it 3 Pinocchios. Yeah, and honestly, this is part of the reason why we do what we do. We want to come out here and give a demonstration so that people can actually see how it was. They can touch, the saddle. They can see the uniforms that we wear. They can touch the tent and get a small, tiny, minuscule glimpse of what these people went through fighting for what they believed. The folks on the North wanted to save the Union, and they were willing to sacrifice so much for this. It boggles the mind that they were such believers in the country that they would sacrifice so much, to keep it together.
And you being local also know of the fact that the first unit that went and volunteered to join the war came from old Abington.
Exactly, and there's actually a monument to Market's Place. I don't know that much about it, only because it's infantry. I'm cavalry, but I do know that they were the first ones to answer the call and go see Uncle Abe.
Yeah. Marching down South Avenue in Whitman to the train station and through all the slogging mud on the common to go up and report to the State House, and it was just quite something.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know, but when they started the trains up again after the long, period of not running, one of the first trips was a reenactment of that, and there had to be close to over 100, 150 reenactors that went and marched and took the train into the town and went up to the State House, just like they did back in '61 to answer the call.
Okay, now that we've got that all out of the way, it's time to talk about horse gear.
Yes.
Because we want to know what the horses had to carry besides human beings.
All right, well, let's start off with this. This is a reproduction 1859 Mcclellan Saddle designed to fit almost any man and almost any horse. So if you're in the cavalry and your horse got injured or lame, there's a pretty good chance that you would be able to take your saddle and put it on another horse and continue to fight. Because if you're horseless, then you ended up in the infantry. Nobody likes to walk. Everybody likes the horses. You'll look and there's a breastplate. So this was issued. A lot of the other stuff was were purchased, post-war. You'd have your saddlebags on the back where you would carry extra horseshoes and nails, because if you think about it, a horse missing shoes or even, having an odd number of shoes is going to be lame. It's like having a flat tire in your car. You can't go anywhere. So often they would keep those in there. You would have clothing on the front. Your greatcoat, because you would go on picket duty, for days or sometimes weeks at a time. So all you would have is what you would carry with you. You would have a nose bag for the horse's grain, to go on if you were issued grain, which on the northern side you were. On the southern side, you kind of had to fare for yourself. Then you'd have a bedroll on the back, and if you'll notice on the Mcclellan Saddle itself, it has a slot in the middle, and that's designed so that the summertime it would help the heat disperse, but also in the wintertime it would help keep the rider warm. So, and I don't know if this comes across on camera, but believe it or not, this is a wooden tree with rawhide on top of it. No padding, no nothing. But it is, I've had the saddle for over 20 years. It's my daily rider. It's the most comfortable saddle that I've ever had. And if you look, you can see that it has a higher than normal pommel and cantle, which is the front and the back, and that's so to keep the riders in and snug. It's very hard to be thrown out of. It can be done, but it's very hard to be thrown out of.
Yeah, you were telling me a little earlier when we started to talk about what we were going to talk about,
Yes.
about how great the horsemen from the north were.
No, it was actually the other way around. The horse.
See, I fed you that line, didn't I?
I saw that. Threw me a softball. So the southern horse soldiers were used to. They had tracks, they had sporting events, and their towns were often separated by long distances. So they still were riding horses frequently. Every young man knew how to ride a horse. That was part of your growing up. Whereas in the north, it had a lot of cities, and they were used to being mostly in carriages or buggies. So they didn't have that horse sense that the southern men did, which is why for the first half of the war, the southern soldiers, southern cavalry, ran circles around the Union cavalry because they just weren't good horse soldiers, because it wasn't, they didn't know about it. They eventually grew into it, and I'm sure you've heard of a battle called Brandy Station, where it was the biggest cavalry battle in the northern hemisphere, and the northern soldiers fought the southern soldiers to a standstill. There was a draw. And it was the first time that they actually held a count to themselves. And the contemporary writers say, this was what made the Union cavalry. And to be honest with you, as the war progressed and the Southern cavalry diminished, the Northern horse soldiers were the ones that blocked Lee during his retreat. For the most part, they would go and take an intersection and block it, and Lee would have to go a different way. And there was infantry involved as well, but the majority of it was the horse soldiers.
Okay, continuing on now with the actual gear here.
Yeah. Let me see. What else do we have? So we've got a surcingle, which is kind of like an extra belt because your girth, which is what holds the saddle on the horse, if that were to break, your saddle is just sitting on there, and that's a wonderful way to come off and get hurt. So that was just added bonus. And then afterwards, you would just, on your person, you'd have a haversack with some of your food and stuff in it. But you also would have, ammo with you, because if you're out there, doing picket duty, you have to have what you need on your person. You can't go back to the commissary and get it. You're out there to make sure that nobody's, going to catch your army unprepared.
Okay, and what have you got in your hand there?
This is called a bridle, and this goes over the horse's head. I will admit this is not a period correct bit because he doesn't need it, and as much as we try to be period correct with as much as we do, safety and security and comfort, for my horse is most important. So this is the bit. It's a gentle bit because my horse is probably the kindest, gentlest soul I've ever met. So I want to make sure that he's comfortable. But they had some harsh bits because a lot of times the horses that were sold to the U.S. government to go out for cavalry, they were unruly. They just were bad horses. And so they had to do what they could to break them in, quickly as possible. And a lot of times it was cruel. It wasn't pretty, but they had to get their objective done. So, but like I said, this is designed for him to be, comfortable and happy.
Yeah, well, there's also, modern laws about animal cruelty, too.
Correct. And the thing is, and I've been reenacting, I think I told you, for 35 years. We won't do anything that hurts our horses mentally, physically, or emotionally. We've had horses come through that enjoy it. We've had horses that come through that, it's just not their thing. This is modern times. It's not the real war. So we want the horses to be comfortable with it. And we want the people to come out and enjoy it and be able to pet them and have fun and learn a little bit, because when they go to the infantry, they've got, a gun and a tent and knowledge. Then they go to the artillery and they've got a tent and a bigger gun and knowledge. But people come here and they pet the horses, and we're able to interact with them a little bit more, and people will ask us questions. And what we're here for is to just take that little spark of interest and kind of blow a little bit on it. So, people will go out and do their own research and maybe read a book or read an article or something and make their own decision instead of hearing, all this background noise that we have about the Civil War. Go out and do some research and make up your own mind. Don't listen to the politicians one way or the other. Make up your own mind. Go read what happened, for real, and you'll get a better understanding, because you can't take today's morals and put them on something 150 years ago. Like, people often are like, oh, General Jackson, he was bad, or General Lee, he was bad. People don't understand that Stonewall Jackson sent his paychecks home from being a Confederate general to build churches for the black, churches and schools for the black people, the African-American people of his town. General Lee didn't actually own any slaves. The ones that were left to him, he freed, and they stayed with the family. So it just, and I'm not justifying, I'm just saying it's a totally different thing. People need to look at all the different avenues of what went on, and the biggest thing that came out of the Civil War, besides the freeing, of the slavery and ending slavery forever, was we became the United States. As opposed to before the war, we were the United States. And it's a subtle difference. So that's what we're here for. We want to educate. We want people to learn, and not with blinders on, but see the whole thing, warts and all. Because we're a great country. We're a wonderful country. We're the kindest country in the world. But we have to look at our history and learn from it. And otherwise, I believe the saying is, those who don't know history are bound to repeat it. And we have to look back and say, we're not perfect, but gosh darn it, we're getting better. So, and end of diatribe.
Okay, thank you. We have somebody else waiting in the wings to talk to us a little bit about what the soldiers actually did.
Nice.
And what the equipment they used as being cavalrymen was. So thank you so much, and let's move on to our next location.
I will hand you off.
Well, we have seen what kind of gear the horse carried. Now let's find out what kind of gear the rider carried. And you are?
Ben Rich.
And your rank?
I don't even know.
You know. Okay. Well, that's all right. You're a cavalryman.
Yes.
Okay. Now, people have a certain image of what the cavalry did during war times, and it isn't necessarily what they actually did. I mean, you have a lot of gear strapped to you here that we've never seen in the movies. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what you've got there?
Sure. Why not? Everybody would carry a Saber Belt. So when you're off the horse, you can carry a saber, usually dragged behind you. You can hook it up higher. You have, obviously, you have some sort of a long arm. This is actually a carbine, a Smith.
So that's a breech loader.
Yes. You would actually go like that. Opens right up. Put your cartridge in. Still have to put a primer to it, and you're good to go.
Okay, because, last year we saw an awful lot of the infantry. We didn't see any cavalry last year, and we did find out that the infantry mostly had muzzle loaders.
Yeah, well, it's much easier to load on a horse when you can do it through here. The Sharps is through that with a rolling block. This has a brake barrel to it. There's a lot of different carbines, but when you're trying to load your long arm through the end, very difficult on a horse. On the ground it's a lot different. You can put the thing down, you can stand around, do whatever you want to do. On a horse it's a lot different. But when you get off the horse, you can still hook it to the ring. You'd wear it around your body. You'd carry a canteen, you'd carry a haversack. You'd have your food and whatnot, and stuff to be able to make your gun keep going. You'd usually have a Bowie knife of sorts. We always had the tall boots, so that was convenient for going through the grass and stuff. Probably the most important thing that anybody could have is a hat. It kept you dry, kept you out of the sun, out of everything. The hat is probably the most important item to have.
Yeah, now you mentioned earlier most cavalrymen also had a sidearm.
Yes.
Do you have one here with you we can take a look at?
Absolutely. The sidearm was always kept primarily on the right side. You would cross draw. It's the standard black powder, Some of the officers had different ones. They had pin fires. That was very interesting. Most people don't even know about that because they say it's either a center fire or a rim fire. Well, they had pin fire as well. And literally, if you smacked it against the side of something, it could go off. Very much silly sidearm to have. They had another kind. It was actually a 9-shot on top and a 20 gauge on the bottom. It was a Lamat. That was also an officer's gun.
That sounds like it fired two different size shells at the same time?
You would be able to have a switch on the top of the hammer. They would either go around for the top or one shot that's a 20 gauge on the bottom. That was quite the argument ender.
Yeah, I can imagine 20 gauge is not a teeny tiny thing.
Right. But it only had about a 3.5 inch barrel to it, and so it was very much not for accuracy for distance. It was more to clear out the tent.
Clear out the tent, or clear out a crowd if they got too close.
Yes, I surmise.
Okay, is there any other gear that you have that you'd like to tell us about?
Well, you have your cup. You have your cartridge box. A lot of people did have a timepiece, but that was a luxury. You look at the sun and you guess what time it is, and you're good to go. No, not too much. I mean, it was basically whatever you would think you would need for camping and survival.
And it might have been a little bit easier for cavalrymen to carry maybe a little bit more than the infantry did, since they could pack it on the horse rather than wearing it on their backs.
Yes, that's very true. And also, some of our gear, though we might have more of it and it might be heavier, it's a lot more maneuverable. We could easily scout out where other people just didn't. You know, they were used to marching in formation and stuff like that. We didn't necessarily march in formation or anything. We did horse commands, but on foot.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, have a wonderful day.
While we were marching through Georgia, hurrah, hurrah, we bring you jubilee. Hurrah, hurrah, the flag that makes you free. So we sing this chorus from Atlanta to the sea. While we were marching through Georgia.
Now we're in with the Union Infantry, and this is Sergeant Mike Reamer, whom some of you may have remembered seeing from last year's show. Now, Mike, what I wanted to find out from you, what was life like in the encampment for the infantry?
Basically, boring. Their days were filled with endless hours of drill, early reveille around 5 a.m., drill, more drill after that, mess call, drill, then break for dinner, and then it would be lights out shortly thereafter.
Now, people who were here early this morning saw some of that drilling going on and some of those raw recruits trying to learn how to march.
Yeah, that's basically what it was. They spent hours and days trying to teach them how to be soldiers. The average soldier probably only saw 3 to 5 days of combat a year. The rest of it was in camp and drill.
Well, learning how to march was really kind of important, because I could see some of those guys this morning, those new recruits, were about ready to trip over one another.
Most of these guys, when they came into the Union Army, to be honest with you, didn't know their right from their left. And they had to learn how to march because infantrymen go everywhere by foot. These guys were marching 20, 30 miles a day, and in some cases going directly into battle after that hike.
And those of us who read a little bit of history know that when Theodore Roosevelt was in the Spanish-American War with what was supposed to be a mounted unit, they called themselves woods-weary walkers because they never got the horses into Cuba.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And infantrymen, they're carrying everything. They've got their pack. They've got a haversack with 5 days' rations of food in it. They're wearing a cartridge box which has 60 rounds of ammunition, referred to as 60 dead men. They've got the waist belt, sometimes with a knife, mostly with a bayonet, with the ignition caps for the musket, and they're carrying the musket, which the Enfield and the Springfield weigh a ton, about 13 pounds, and you're carrying it like this. This is shoulder arms in the Civil War. So this is pretty much where you were. And on top of all that, you're wearing wool in the southern heat.
Well, you know, that was the most common fabric back in those days, especially for uniforms.
It's actually pretty smart because wool is self-extinguishing. If it caught fire, it puts itself out. And if you were in a setting like this, woodland, you're crashing through briars and sharp twigs. It's not that easy for this stuff to penetrate. So it's also somewhat cooling because as you sweat, the wool gets wet, and as it evaporates, it tends to pull heat away from you. So it has its advantages. It's got a lot more disadvantages.
So were the Confederates using wool or cotton for their uniforms?
They were using wool for the main part of the uniform. You'll notice my shirt. This might have been my favorite work shirt when I was home. When I joined the Army, I'm issued a pair of trousers and a sack coat. That's it. Oh, and the hat and the shoes. As far as a shirt, I'd probably write home to my wife or my mother and say, hey, can you send me my favorite work shirt? Because the one that the Army had was made of a material that is like a dome flannel, very heavy, very hot, very uncomfortable.
So what else did the the infantryman have to carry with him as he went on his way from campaign to campaign?
Well, he'd be issued one blanket, one shelter half, one ground blanket, which would have been made of rubber, change of shirt, some personal items if he had them, tobacco, pipe, cigars. 5 days worth of marching rations would be in the haversack, which would be a pound of green coffee beans, which he would have to roast and grind himself, 9 pieces of hardtack, 1 pound of salt pork, 1 pound of desiccated vegetables if it was available, 1 pound of sugar if it was available, 1 pound of grits. There was a standard issue, and it all depended on what they could get when they were down south, what they could forage from the enemy.
And we have heard stories about some of the forages.
Yeah, some of them were not very nice, but the whole idea was deprive the enemy of it and destroy his will to fight.
Okay, now, I was just talking to the U.S. Sanitary Commission, and what would happen if you got a comfort box from the USCC?
If you got a comfort box from the USSC, you'd probably find socks, maybe a clean shirt, some paper, pencils, or ink and a quill, maybe some sweets or some treats if they could put them in there. Stuff that you needed. The Army didn't provide a lot to the soldiers outside of the basic equipment. Socks, you needed them. You rode home for them or you bought them somewhere. Sweets, anything like that, your family was responsible to send it to you, just pretty much like today. The USSC was actually the forerunner of today's USO.
Not to mention the Red Cross.
Yes, absolutely. Clara Barton was one of the ones in charge. So they were a great help to the soldiers.
Okay, now, during a campaign, how did the infantry know what was going to be happening that day? I mean, they knew that the artillery would be shooting back and forth. Mm-hmm. And who determined, or how was it determined actually who was going to charge?
Commanding officers would receive their orders from the commanding general, and a lot of stuff was done by bugle call or drums. In the case of cavalry, it was bugle call. Infantry, drums. Whenever you hear drums in a Civil War movie or on the battlefield, there's usually a command associated with it. Specific drum beats would call you for officers' call, reveille, go to sleep, taps, tattoo, dinner, form for battle, form for this, form for that. It's every regiment pretty much had their own drum calls that these men were drilled in, and they got used to it. So when they heard the drum roll, they kind of had an idea what was coming next.
Okay, is there anything else that you would like to let us know about what life was like for the infantry back then?
Yeah, it was tough. More soldiers died of disease in the camps than they did in actual combat. Diarrhea was awful. Took a lot of guys. I mean, you're putting a whole bunch of people from different parts of the country. There were no vaccines at that time. People were being exposed to things that they may not have had in this part of the country, but were in that part of the country. Guys got sick. And one of the things the USSC did was they came in and they showed them, you got to wash your hands. You gotta take a bath. You got to clean yourself. You got to make the coffee upstream of the latrines. They came in and they were the den mothers, basically.
Den mothers do a lot.
Yes, they do. They do.
Okay, thanks, Mike, for that insight into what life was like for the infantry during the Civil War. We are now here with some members of the 54th Massachusetts Infantry. And gentlemen, can you give me a little bit of information about the history of the 54th, how it got started, and some of the campaigns it might have been in during the war?
Okay. During the Civil War, around 1863, Frederick Douglass went to Abraham Lincoln, and they wanted to get some black soldiers involved in the fight also because the Union actually needed them, you know. So they decided to get the 54th started. Robert Shaw was first commanding officer. He led it, and he took it to great heights from there.
Okay, and what can you tell me about, is there anything you can tell me about how the unit was actually formed, where the volunteers came from?
Sure. So there was great swell from Massachusetts, but the black population in Massachusetts at the time was not large enough to fill a regiment, so efforts were made again by Frederick Douglass and others to recruit throughout the North. And so they went through all New York, as far as Indiana, Ohio, to recruit black men to come and fill the ranks. They trained in Reedville, which is in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, and so many men came that actually they had too many for one regiment. So they formed the 54th, and then they formed the 55th Infantry Regiment, and then they had still spillover, and they filled the 5th Cavalry Regiment as well.
Okay, what campaigns did the 54th take part in?
They took part in Fort Wagner. That was their first big campaign, was Fort Wagner, and they assaulted. They lost the first battle, but through attrition, they finally won the battle, and they took the fort over. Fort Wagner.
The next big battle was in Olustee, Florida, in February of the following year. Again, initially, it was a loss, the battle for the Union, but the 54th proved themselves with their bravery, covering the retreat of the Union troops, and really kind of saved the day, helping the Union troops get to the train and get to safety at the end of the battle.
Okay. Any other campaigns that you can tell me about?
Honey Hill, November of 1864, and then their final battle, Boykin's Mill, was actually one of the battles that was fought after Appomattox. It was about 9 days after Lee surrendered at Appomattox. There were still battles that went on, and so the 54th fought their final battle after the official surrender at Appomattox in April of 65.
Well, that happened an awful lot in just about every
The
war.
word hadn't gotten around yet. The word hadn't gotten around yet. Communication wasn't what it is today, so nobody actually knew what was going on.
Okay. What was life like for the men of the 54th? I mean, we're here in an encampment, and I just had a talk with Sergeant Reamer down the way there, talking about how hard it was for the soldiers that were in his regiment. What was life like for the soldiers in the 54th?
Well, there was a lot of racism within the Union Army, and the movie Glory kind of accurately depicts that. What's not accurate is the fact that the governor at the time, John A. Andrew, made sure that the 54th was outfitted well. So they had all of the equipment, they had the rifles, they had the shoes, they had everything that they needed as far as equipment, because Massachusetts did stand behind their men and made sure they were outfitted. On a larger scale within the Army, the U.S. Army, there wasn't the belief that black men could actually fight and perform well in battle. So initially, those black troops and many other black regiments were reduced to digging latrines and other kind of menial labor initially, and then they proved themselves in the battle again, like at Fort Wagner, at the Battle of Olustee, and that kind of changed the narrative.
Okay, well, how about post-war, when the men were mustered out? What was life like for them then? Were they able to find work or have anything, find homes and things like that?
I haven't studied a lot of the post-war history, but I know that there were some that went on to play professional baseball. There was Sergeant Carney, one of the most famous members of the 54th, was a state employee and actually died in an elevator accident in the State House in around 1908, I believe. So those are two that I know of in terms of post-war activities in life.
That doesn't give me an awful lot of confidence in the State House, since I do work in there from time to time. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. You've been very helpful in filling in some of the gaps of the history that we haven't heard about.
And I'm Private Boykins. How are you? I'm Private Boykins.
And you are?
Private Emmett Bell Sykes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Nice meeting you. Bye-bye.
There we're having the drums that Mike was just telling us about, calling people to formation. But we're here talking with
Rhiannon Doherty, and I portray Dr. Mary Walker.
And we are here to kind of talk to her about Mary Walker because she was a very important person in the Civil War, especially as far as health matters went.
Yeah, she was actually a very unique person. She was one of very few women who became physicians and actually served on record in the Union Army. And actually, she was a contract assistant surgeon, paid to be so.
So you have a gentleman down here who was a contract surgeon, and you portraying a contract surgeon. Okay, what can you tell us, maybe more about some of the accomplishments that she had?
Sure. So, as I said, she's one of very few women to go to medical school. She went to medical school in Syracuse, born in Oswego. She then made her way to Washington, D.C., adamant that she was going to serve her country. They told her they'd pay her to be a nurse, and she refused and said, I'd rather volunteer to be a doctor, because that's what I am. Eventually, she actually got her way, and she was allowed to join with a regiment and serve in the field. She did serve as assistant surgeon, and she was actually, her career ended, general, when she was captured over enemy lines, actually treating Southern civilians. And then she was imprisoned at Andersonville for about 4 months, nearly lost her vision, worked for a little bit in a women's prison afterwards, and then retired from the military.
I have heard that she received some honors for the work she did.
She did. She's actually, to this day, still the only woman who has a Congressional Medal of Honor.
And do you know what it was that she was awarded that for?
Essentially, heroic efforts in the line of service, and then, in the imprisonment was considered inhumane as well, so that was part of it.
Okay. Now, last year we have some footage of you performing an amputation, and your what shall we call it, your stand-in, your surgical dummy was not able to be with you this year.
It's true. My steward wasn't around this year, so I was just me and my little display. But next year we're hoping to come back better than ever.
We'll be looking forward to that. And I want to thank you for talking with us today.
Oh, happy to do so.
We are now finished with the military encampments, but there were many other people who followed the soldiers and provided other necessary functions to assist the soldiers in their daily life, like this blacksmith who was here demonstrating the fashioning of nails. A blacksmith with a portable forge was able to create almost anything that might be needed from metal. Things like horseshoes and horseshoe nails, critical for the cavalry. One of the most famous groups that traveled with the Army was the United States Sanitary Commission. Their work at home and traveling with the armies helped wounded soldiers recover and helped keep all soldiers relatively free from various types of sepsis due to the unsanitary conditions found in most camps. This was at a time when the medical profession was just discovering the importance of cleanliness. This is the tent and campsite of the U.S. Sanitary Commission, and I'm talking with
Deborah DeFranco.
Deborah, and can you tell me how the U.S. Sanitary Commission got started?
Actually, there was a need with the volunteer soldiers because they were Army regulars, and then, of course, the call to arms was for voluntary soldiers, the average citizen. There was just a need for supplies as well as camp regulations to help keep things clean. These gentlemen did not know about Army life, and we had learned a lot of things from the Crimean War and Florence Nightingale.
And they didn't really have a whole idea, even on their own daily lives outside of the Army, what sanitation was.
I would say so, because without a woman to properly take care of them, absolutely. They would dig latrines upstream. They'd make rookie mistakes of that nature.
Or even not even build a latrine in the first place.
Yes, I've heard stories. It was not the type of camp I would want to stroll through, let me tell you.
Well, you know, those of us who were Boy Scouts remember those kind of things when you were learning about such things. Okay, can you tell me when the commission got started?
Actually, in 1861, right at the onset of the war, when the call to arms came and they were looking for the volunteers, Reverend Henry Bellows actually wrote to Mr. Lincoln and asked for such an organization to help out. And Lincoln saw it as a fifth wheel in the wagon. He really thought that they were going to get underfoot and be very ineffective, of which we definitely have proved otherwise.
Okay, now, when you were out in the field with the soldiers, what kind of services did you provide for them?
Generally, a lady would not be out in the field. We were actually compiling the supplies and such matters for the war effort back home. Ladies would also volunteer as nurses for the long-term care hospitals, which were far beyond the lines where all of the action was going on. Male nurses would be actually on the battlefields, but the Union volunteer hospitals and long-term care facilities were actually far back, like back in Washington, D.C., where they would transport the soldiers for long-term care. That's where you basically saw the women, the hospital matrons. Back here in Boston, though, necessarily, we were collecting items and raising money for the war efforts, and also to help build soldiers' and sailors' homes when the soldiers could not return to service and they were disabled for life. So we were trying to do things to help them out. And it did include making quilts, knitting socks, things of that nature. Also giving widows some work so that they would be able to, make a meager income. Anything we could do to help.
And in doing those things, I mean, people always think of, what the women did to help in the war was roll bandages, and there was a lot more to it than that.
Yes, they did roll bandages in the early days, and they also got together and they made over 125,000 quilts. 125 were on record because they were very good with their record keeping of creating Sanitary Commission quilts. They were supposed to be very rough items, very quickly made of not stellar materials, to be used up in the field. And out of all those quilts, there might be 18 today that survive that have Sanitary Commission stamps on them.
Oh, okay. Anything else that the Sanitary Commission would do for the soldiers and the sailors and whatever?
Yes, actually, when the war concluded, the Sanitary Commission also tried to help get them employment, so that way they would be able to make a life for themselves after the war was over. Although it seems to be that only 1 or 2% of the soldiers were ever picked up by employers, some of them saw them in a less than stellar light. Being off in war, getting drunk, making, it was a little bit too much of what you would consider a hazardous life or a mean life to be employed at my staunch company that is for family and good values. And you were running it off making war. So sometimes all the patriotism that you saw during the war sometimes took a bit of a turn. We did read reports of that some employers are just not interested in giving a soldier, dutiful employment.
Yeah, well, some of those things, I think, history has repeated itself over the decades.
Yes, we definitely see that with the way that the care of our veterans, they shouldn't be homeless on the street, yet we see that also yet today. Did see it back then as well, and it's sad.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. And now we're going to take a look and see about some of the things that they have to show us here at the U.S. Sanitary Commission's encampment. Our first volunteer to help show us about some of the things that the U.S. Sanitary Commission did is
Katie Booth from Chelmsford.
Chelmsford. You've come a bit of a way for here today.
Yeah, it's like an hour and 15, but it's worth it.
Okay, now we have some things on the table here. Can you tell us what we've got here and why?
A lot of them are the supplies that the troops have requested, because initially they thought the war would be only 3 months, which turned into 4 years.
Or 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. So what the Sanitary Commission did with supplies was we would get a list or requests from people, such as these socks, because their feet would get all wet and whatnot. Instead of keep putting on the same pair of socks, they need clean.
I wouldn't mind having these for winter socks for myself.
While shuffling. So how they got the money for these supplies, they had fairs, which towns raised money by selling things so they could get the supplies, or they would have get-togethers and they'd knit socks if someone couldn't make shirts. So they would all pitch in and help out together because it could be their father, their son, their brother, and they didn't want them to go without and have aids of comfort.
That was like the next level of bee, going from quilting bee to sock bee to shirt bee.
Yeah, well, sometimes just wear and tear. Or if they got sick and they might have wrecked their clothing.
Yeah. So there wasn't like a communal thing like the old quilting bees. It was more of an individual thing when they were making them?
Well, we tried to make a lot of individual shirts, and sometimes just didn't go out that way. So you just get what you could and fill out the request for supplies as best as you could.
Anything else here you want to show?
I kind of like this soda bottle. It has a little cork on it, and it's pretty heavy. And what we also taught them was basic hygiene. Like, here's some soap, and we will go into camps and actually say, you got to be clean. Here's some supplies. Yeah. Change your clothing and put on something clean.
Sounds like a mother to a teenager. Here's some soap, use it.
Exactly. Do it now.
Anything else you want to show us here?
Yeah, well, we got candles, and we also got a lot of bandages because we aided in the medical aspect of it, and they reused them. So we would try and get them clean from the laundress and always have a good supply of bandages that we could pass along because, as we know, they would get hurt.
What's this little silverish thing here?
Well, this is just for some water.
A dipper?
Pretty much. Just put it in, fill up your cup, because you weren't going to put your hands in it or anything, or your face to drink the water.
So we go from the little dipper to the tin dipper. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next station. Our next friend from the U.S. Sanitary Commission is?
Rowena Keith.
And Rowena, we have a box here, and you're going to show me what this is. What did they call this?
They called it a comfort box, or comfort box. The Clara Barton and the women of the USSC. Clara Barton wasn't really part of the USSC for a little while, but not for long. But the ladies would get together on Sunday afternoons. President Lincoln asked them to get together on Sunday afternoons and make things for the boys that were in the fields, fighting for our honor and dignity and for the North. And so they'd get together. A lot of Clara Barton had warehouses full of things, but the USSC would make individual boxes like this one.
Okay.
Would you like to see what's in it?
Well, I was just going to say, why don't we see what kind of things you were sending to the boys in the field?
Okay. We have a beautiful shirt. They needed shirts all the time. They would get so ruined and torn, bullet holes going through their sleeves. That happened to Clara Barton, actually. And it scared her. She was in Fredericksburg at one point. So I think it was after Fredericksburg. And then, so we have two of these, and one is very nice. It feels a tropical wool weight, and this is a cotton. And here are some shorts that they might have worn either for pajamas, to sleep in, or under their wool pants so they wouldn't get chafed. Now this is a mattress. As long as it is, this is a mattress. So they would fill this. They would send these to the boys so they'd be comfortable. And they'd fill it with pine needles or leaves or things like that. And they'd have a nice, comfortable night sleep.
Well, that would certainly be better than sleeping on the bare ground.
On the ground. Tell me about it. I've done that. They always needed candles. Always. So we've got those for them. We've got soap. Different soaps for them.
Yeah, they needed to learn how to wash, many of them.
Yeah, and along with the candles are the matches. These are matches. Odd, aren't they? And this would be called a housekeeper. And it's actually a little sewing kit because the boys learned to sew. They lost a button that was holding up their pants. They'd have to get it done and taken care of. You can see there's the different colors of their uniform, different patch, so they could patch their pants or patch their coat, their jackets. So.
Yeah, and buttons and thread and everything.
Buttons, thread, the whole deal. That's right. Because if they lost that one button that was necessary to keep their pants up, they'd be in trouble.
Yeah, they couldn't run too far or too fast with that.
That's right. And we also have some socks. The ladies would knit socks by the dozens. And there would be, sometimes there was a little note. Let me see if it was put in there. No note this time. But at one point, there was a young girl who put a note in the socks. And she said, whoever receives these socks, please look me up when you get out of the war, when the war ends. And she put her name and the town that she lived in. Naughty girl. We have a Bible, in case some good reading. And this would be considered like either a pouch or a water cup. They could drink from this. This is totally waterproof. But they'd most likely keep a little hardtack in there and maybe some jerky, something like that.
Hardtack that they'd break their teeth on, and jerky they might too.
And probably had bugs in it. You know, that was added protein. But some guys would scoop the bugs off. They were like flower weevils or something like that. But, I mean, they came from the Crimean War. That's a long time. But I've seen hardtack last forever. It really, I'm sure, it stays, but I wouldn't want to eat it. But the guys did. That's all they had. They had coffee. When they ran out of coffee, they used acorns. So they'd roast acorns and make coffee from that. These they'd put in the bag because their pans would get hot, so this would save any burns. Or their muckets would get hot. A mucket is a cup. It's and like a little pot, and it has a lid and a handle, a wire handle on it.
So, in other words, that's an early pot holder.
Yes, it is. And we have another sock. I don't know why there's only one, but that might be a sad tale. We wouldn't want to discuss that. And that would be, along with anyone's imagination, they could put in there wooden combs, toothbrushes, anything. Whatever they had, they were asked to donate, and it would get to the boys. In the beginning, they would try to send the packages directly to their boy. And the problem with that is they moved around a lot. So when the Teamsters couldn't find the camp, they'd throw it overboard. They just threw it overboard and forgot it. And people would come and rummage through it and get what they wanted. But later, Clara Barton and the USSC both developed a way that they could warehouse this stuff. And it was called stuff. They could warehouse this stuff and deliver it to exactly where the encampment was, because they kept track of where they were all the time. And that way the boys got not something from their family, but something maybe their family made. So, in fact, there's a story about a man who was going to die in the hospital. And they made quilts as well. And he was going to die. By morning, he was going to be dead. The nurses were sure of it. So they knew he was cold. They put a quilt on over him. And they were surprised. And the next morning, he was sitting up in bed. And like, what is the story behind your wonderful recovery? And he said, I looked down on the quilt and I saw my precious Anna's name. She had signed the quilt and he got it. That gives me goosebumps. I thought it was a wonderful story.
Okay, well, thank you so much for showing me this comfort box.
You're quite welcome, sir.
Okay, now and now we've come full circle. We're back with Deborah again, and she has something she wants to tell us about this guy back here.
Right? This is Old Abe, the Battle Eagle. He's a symbol of America. That's one of the reasons he was chosen for the 8th Wisconsin Regiment's symbol. He came to them as a small eaglet, and they raised him, and throughout the war he changed his colors from brown, which is what a bald eagle would be, to the full-grown colors of what you see here. He actually survived the entire war, and also the exploits of the newspapers would follow Old Abe's accomplishments when they went to Fredericksburg. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't think it was Fredericksburg. You're gonna have to cut.
That's all right, you know, wherever it was they went.
Well, anyway, because I'm ashamed to say I don't know much about the Wisconsin geography, but Old Abe's exploits were followed by the papers, and it turns out that he was quite popular, because who wouldn't want to fight underneath the America symbol itself? The USSC did latch on to this, especially at the Central Fair, which was held out in the middle of the country. And Mr. Sewell also saw the value in the eagle and its interest, but also noticed that children also like to follow the exploits of Old Abe. So he decided to start off a campaign to help do some fundraising. Originally, he only expected to raise $2,000 for the efforts of the Central Fair. He had these cards actually printed up, and they are of Old Abe. He sold them to children for about $1 for 100, or I think it was $1 for 100. And what they would do is they would go out and resell the cards and then take the money and become members of the Army of the American Eagle and give it to the Central Fair. The $2,000 he expected to raise became $16,000. All the children that that did raise all this money for the soldiers and sailors' homes far exceeded what Mr. Sewell ever thought they would. In today's money, we're talking $16,000 of their money is $325,000 in ours. But that's the reason why I'm talking about Old Abe, the Wisconsin Eagle. He does have one other Massachusetts connection, though. It turns out that George Washington Robbins of nearby Avon, Mass., was visiting a relative out in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, at the time that the 8th Wisconsin was being raised. I guess the speeches must have been really fantastic and very patriotic. He was stirred. He joined. He was the only Massachusetts soldier belonging to a Wisconsin regiment. And that's the connection to Old Abe as well as to our state. A very little-known fact.
Very little known, yes. But then again, people from this area were very anxious to get into the war.
Yes, they were. I have to say that the patriotic fervor was quite adamant, and Abington actually sent more than its quota of soldiers that was requested.
And they also sent the very first unit that was requested.
Absolutely. We're not only first in alphabetical order, but we're first in many other ways, too. Very proud to say so.
Okay, thank you so much. And that is the story and a lot of other information about the U.S. Sanitary Commission.
Oh, we'll rally round the flag, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. We will rally from the hillside and gather from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Our Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors and up with the stars. We'll rally round the flag, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
Well, welcome everyone to Island Grove. This is an Island Grove history tour that is being done in conjunction with Flag Day Founders Day weekend here in June of 2023. Oh, I got to get the year right, don't I, if I'm a historian. But I always like to start out with a little bit about Abington history and the kind of like where are we and what are we doing here sort of thing. And does anyone remember the name of the two original colonies that were founded here in the country as the first settlers?
Was Manamuskegon one of them?
Well, Manamuskegon was the name of the Indians gave this area. But no, I was actually thinking of the Plymouth Bay colony and the Massachusetts Bay colony. And it's important in this because Abington was originally part of the Bridgewaters, and we were as far north as you could possibly get in the Plymouth Bay colony. Yet most of our settlers actually came over the line from the Massachusetts Bay colony south over the line to settle here, or get land here, or establish themselves here. And indeed, there is a marker on Route 58 called the Heap of Stones, and it commemorates that line that separated the two colonies. And it is believed to be the oldest political line in the country. So the earliest political. It's right on the town line. So
Weymouth?
As you're heading into Weymouth on Adams Street, it's on
the old drive-in theater.
Just beyond it, actually, it's on the left-hand side. So do see the Heap of Stones, but that's why it's there. Now, one of the earliest settlers who helped found the town was Jacob Nash. Strangely, he never lived here. part of his family did. But in Weymouth, he was a housewright, he was a selectman, he had a bunch of different titles there. But he had land in Abington, and with other landholders in Abington, they understood the value of their land, and community would be greater if this were established as a town, as opposed to just the upper fringes of Bridgewater. So they took steps to do that. And what you needed back then to do it was a learned minister and a map, basically. So they pulled that together. England didn't like their minister. He wasn't properly schooled, so they had to redo that. But part of what they had to do in order to build a church, to have a minister, was build a church. So needed a sawmill. So what we know as Island Grove behind us is actually Jacob Nash's mill pond. That is the correct name for this body of water. And it was built at the south end at what is now Center Ave, damming the Shumatuscacant River, Shumatuscacant, Lesser Beaver Brook. And George, you mentioned Manamuskegon. It's a common misconception that Manamuskegon means land of many beavers. It does not. It's land of the tall waving green grasses. But we do have the beaver name in the town in that the Shumatuscacant River, Lesser Beaver Brook. And the other side of town with Ames Knoll State Park has the flow of the Shumatascacat, Greater Beaver Brook. So the beaver is in the town naming lexicon, but not where you think it is. So calling it land of many beavers, it may be, but that's not what Manamuskegon means. So anyway, but the body of water we ended up with was similar to this. It varied with the height of the dam, not surprisingly, how much water they held. And initially, the North Cove over there, North Cove over there, and the East Cove over here were not flooded. So it was more of a crescent-shaped pond, actually teardrop-shaped, with the main body of water here, and the Shumatuscacant flowing underneath and through. And that's what gave us what is now known as Island Grove Pond. The name Island Grove Pond, I'll point it out to you a little later in the tour, but if you were at the dam looking this way, the body of land across from us that now has the stone bandstand and the flagpole looked like an island, because all you saw to either side of it was water. So it appeared to be an island, thus Island Grove. So let's head across the bridge. The bridge was built in 1912 as a war memorial piece, and it replaced some earlier efforts. There was a ferry that went from one side to the other. I think it was a wooden bridge for a while. But as part of the town's bicentennial efforts in 1912, they commissioned the building of the bridge. It was designed by J.W. Beals and Sons, the architects. Beals was originally from Hanover, and he did a lot of work in town. His firm designed the Dyer Memorial Library and what I grew up calling the Abington Savings Bank, now Santander. And what else? Well, one of my favorites to mention that he designed is Castle in the Clouds in Moultonbury, New Hampshire. At least that was the family firm. I think the sons were in place by then. And so anyway, the town got together in order for the celebration. Now, the celebration in 1912 was quite different in that when the Civil War was being fought, leading up to the Civil War, even after the Civil War, Abington was a larger town. When it was originally incorporated in 1712, it included present-day Abington, Rockland, Whitman, and even part of Hanover, the Drinkwater section of Hanover. So when they were celebrating the anniversary, the towns had split by then. They split by the 1870s. So it was actually 3 towns coming together in 1912 to celebrate the bicentennial of the town. And each town had its own celebration, but came together here. This was kind of like the ultimate part of the whole celebration, was the unveiling of the bridge and memorial arch. The arch was also designed by Beal. I actually had the original blueprint design for it. And And I love the fact that the reliefs of the Army and Navy on each one on the original were sketched in. They were an afterthought made by the Women's Aid Society. We'll stop here for just a second to get a good view. And on top, the bronze eagle was designed by Bela Lyon Pratt. And he's maybe probably more famous for the sculptures to either side of the entrance to the Boston Public Library. He also designed some gold coins for the U.S. Mint and was quite famous for his day. He kept a running journal through letters sent to his mother, which we have had access to over the years, and there's a delightful story that goes along with it. He was snowshoeing up in New Hampshire, and on the train on the way home, I believe it was shoe manufacturer Louis Crossett who turned to him when he got on the sleigh on the way to the train station and said, "Aren't you?" And come to find out, of course, Louis Crossett, the shoe manufacturer, Crossett Shoe, you probably know the building better as New England Art in North Abington. Louis Crossett was a philanthropist and he paid for the eagle. So suddenly the sculptor himself and the patron were on a train heading back to Boston after spending time in New Hampshire that weekend. And they apparently enjoyed each other's company for the whole trip along. But had a chance to talk about the work and everything else. And this is all recounted in a letter that Bela Lyon Pratt wrote to his mother. And there was a web page devoted to it for a while. I don't think it's up anymore, but I copied some salient points. It was just fun to see that little happenstance come together that resulted in this eagle. All of it was formed, the three pieces were all formed in Rhode Island, and the name of the company's escaping. Gorham Foundry. Gorham Foundry did all of those. Although it looks like stone, the monument is actually poured concrete. And it led to problems over the years. They did something a bit experimental with it, and that is, in order to make it look like stone, they poured a very watery concrete mix. And I think we've all seen what happens to a mud puddle when the sun comes out and it dries. What happens? Cracks. You know? So over the years it cracked. It was a clever idea. There's no reinforcing it. It's not hollow, but through the cracking over the years, the water got in behind and started spalling the concrete panels. A few years back, I was the architect in charge of fixing it, and we had to actually go in and drill in behind and put in grout behind to solidify what's up there. And the project was done in two phases. The first was the concrete, and the second was the bronze work. And we had some grant money to help with all of that, which was a good thing. And the bronze every now and then needs attention. Chapman Waterproofing did the concrete work, and Daedalus restorers did the bronze work for us, and they also did, as we'll see, the abolitionist panel on the stone down in the Grove. So there's efforts afoot to repair the bridge now. I mean, the scope of work was just the arch.
Looks nice.
And it came out well. It's not perfect. I was given a bunch of samples to match the finished infill for the cracks, and it matches perfectly in some places, but you go 5 feet away and the exact same mix doesn't match anymore. So
I want to talk all though too.
Yeah. So
how much do you suppose that eagle weighs, Doug?
I don't remember. I actually have photographs of it on the ground, and it's surprising how tall it is. It's like 12 feet tall. So, but up in the air, it just doesn't quite look the same. But there is an old postcard that shows it on the ground before it was hoisted into position. So we didn't have to remove it to work on it, and instead they staged it. And I have some wonderful pictures that were taken of it surrounded by staging and being cleaned and being polished up and treated in bronze again. The bronze restored. The Women's Aid Society paid for the Army and Navy bas-reliefs that are to either side of the arch. As I said, they were an afterthought, but a nice contribution to the whole piece. Well, why don't we walk up under the arch and into the Grove. I will mention that the bridge is part of an ongoing project the town has paid for and had engineering studies done to understand how bad that is and what it will take to fix it before the tour started. George mentioned his father had worked on the rails here back in the early 1960s. So we know that what we're looking at is at least that old. And we're due to have George's father back, if he was still alive, to do it again, because we definitely need new rails. And you'll see a section of them are actually cordoned off by those barriers. The anticipation is for tonight's fireworks, this bridge will be full of people, and they'll be leaning against the rail, looking to the north to the fireworks. And this also bears some explanation, realizing that we're being recorded right now. There's a lot of background noise right now, and people seeing this for the first time have no reason to understand that this is a Civil War reenactment weekend here at Island Grove as part of Flag Day, Founders Day, and there is a mock battle going on the lower meadow. So you're hearing cannon fire and gunfire. That's part of that, and I'm sure we'll get a little bit of that on tape before we're done. But let's head up the stairs to the arch, and I think we'll head up to the point from there. On to what we call the point of Island Grove, and it was a point, it was a peninsula actually, until the late 1960s, when the town took the cove to this side over here and put a dike across the end to make a sandy bottom swimming hole. But up until that time, we would have been surrounded by the Grove Pond on three sides. The advantage to this is we can even tell you from here right now there's always a breeze and it's always very comfortable. The other thing that happened that kind of made Island Grove the historic point that it is today is in the 1840s, the Old Colony Railroad came out from Boston down to Plymouth, and they did so by going through Abington, and they did so to the east of where we are standing on Island Grove Pond, and there's a street that separates us from the railroad called Park Avenue, again relatively for the town a fairly new street, and the property that we're on went all the way over to Plymouth Street originally and then got bisected by the railroad. But with the railroad coming to town, they wanted more business on weekends. They did, because they were busy through the week, but weekends were something else. So they would do excursions, and they were looking for destinations. This became a destination for abolitionist speakers in the run-up to the Civil War. People would come out from Boston by train, and there was a bit of a whistle-stop station just like near the gate of Island Grove Park on the Park Avenue side. And they would come here and sit under the trees with this beautiful breeze and listen to the abolitionist speakers talk about slavery and man's inhumanity to man and what the South was doing. And it became an event. It became an event that one Moses Arnold came to with his father and listened to the speakers. A lot of locals listened to the speakers as well. And when Civil War broke out, Abington had a huge response to it in terms of when they sent men to the war, how early they sent men to the war. They really answered Lincoln's first request, first call to arms. And Abington supplied the Civil War, not just in men, but our shoe industry had come in by then, also fired by the railroad, or enabled by the railroad, if you will. So we supplied at least, I've heard different numbers, but at least half of the boots to the Union Army came from Abington. So we were known as a shoe town, and we were known for sending our men to war during the Civil War. After the war, Arnold, who was wounded in battle and decorated in battle, came back to Abington and opened and ran a very successful shoe factory known as Arnold Shoe. And if you're familiar with Abington, the brick shoe factory near the depot in North Abington was his factory. He felt very strongly about his time during the war, and he wanted to commemorate what happened here in Island Grove out on the point. That led up to it, and the important speakers that were here in that time, and the inspiration that sent our men to war. So he took from a nearby meadow a very large stone. This is not from this site, it was brought to this site, and he had a bronze plaque installed, and we are told that this was installed and created right on the exact spot of the speaker stand. So when he talks about the people who on this spot, William Lloyd Garrison, Wendell Phillips, Edward Quincy, Theodore Parker, all these people, not just on this spot, spoke and did the rabble-rousing that gave us the lead up to the Civil War from here. And since then, the town has always recognized the connection between Island Grove, particularly the Point, and the Civil War, because it's the main tie to this, and why it was entirely appropriate that this would become a war memorial, basically, among everything else. Island Grove has been a lot of things over the years. It was privately owned for the longest time. The town didn't take it until I think the mid-1880s, but it was privately owned up until then. It was an amusement park. It was a cemetery, and we'll hopefully have a chance to get up there and see what's left of a few headstones up there. But,
when was this erected, do you know?
Let's see, this I think was about 1908, if I remember correctly. It was before the bridge was done. So Arnold was kind of first in order to start recognizing this place, and people saw it and saw that it was good and decided to do more of it, which is how the bridge and the arch came in. But I want to move on next to the nearby stone bandstand, because that kind of begins to relate to what ensued as well after the bridge went in and the memorial arch went in and people started spending more time here. So let's take a little break and walk over to the stone bandstand. We've moved just a few feet away to the west, and what I wanted to point out about this location is there is behind us a stone bandstand that was built around 1920. As the Grove became more accessible through Memorial Bridge and the Arch, and as more things started happening here, particularly after the bicentennial celebrations in 1912, they needed, frankly, more facilities to accommodate what was happening here. They had built a bit of a platform out here on this part of the point to do band concerts, and they decided to do a bandstand. I've long believed that they took a look at the one Whitman had built, South Abington had built a few years before, and decided they were going to one-up them. So they built, if you look at the two bases, they're virtually identical, except ours is just a little bit bigger. But they never built the superstructure for this with the roof and the posts and whatever. When it was originally built, it had a wooden roof, and the inside was used as a boys' changing room because at the time, this was obviously decades and decades before we had a swimming pond behind us. The swimming area was right over here where the lifeguards stand, and you would swim in the Grove Pond. By the 1960s, it got a little too polluted for that, and that's kind of what led to the creation of the Sandy Bottom swimming hole, which is actually even chlorinated. It's quite an elaborate system. But by the 1930s, the wooden roof leaked too much, and they put in a reinforced concrete roof instead. And they fortunately did a great job, because every year we put like a 30-foot Christmas tree on top of it, and it has no problem handling the weight. We've had trees topple because wires break and hardware collapses and whatever, but there's nothing wrong with the concrete base there. Next to it, of course, you see the 50-foot flagpole. One of the first recent celebrations we did in the Grove was after the abolitionist stone was restored by Daedalus, who redid the bronze work for us. We decided we wanted to rededicate it, and in order to do so, we had a Flag Day celebration. And we are here today because of that first Flag Day celebration. It led to subsequent celebrations, and it enlarged and became something much bigger. But what we realized, much to the irony of the event, is that Island Grove didn't have a flagpole. So the town had voted $5,000 that year for the celebration. We didn't use it for the celebration. And after it was done, I turned to the assistant town manager and said, can we use that money and put in a flagpole? So $5,000 bought us a 50-foot flagpole, which stands here now. And it was a good use of the money. It's a very prominent location in the town. And we have yet, I think maybe the town bought one flag, but I know I put out an appeal on social media for, who would buy us a flag at like $150 a piece. And we immediately had like 8 different families or groups come forward. And we got about 2 or 3 years out of each flag, so it won't be long before we put it on appeal again. We've also learned our lesson. It comes down for the winter because it's brutal out here. It is so brutal out here in the winter. And as I said, it will knock down Christmas trees that are guy wired in place by elevator cable. It does a number on a flag at the same time. So, but this is the weekend, either Memorial Day or this weekend is when it's likely to fly again. So we're back in operation for the season. The bandstand has been revitalized again. It now houses a full electric service, and the service handles future lighting for the flagpole from the ground. It lights the abolitionist stone and lights the Christmas tree when there's one on top of it. And it also is by Santa's secret workshop. And when we light the Christmas tree, Santa Claus graces us with his presence and meets the children inside.
Is that just one empty room?
It's one stone room with a petition in there and all of Santa's gear set up. I have a key and it's in there now, but it's also, when Santa's not using it, we store a lot of stuff in there. So I won't open it up today. But we've revitalized it quite a bit. It needs more work, and I had actually the rails put up there that are there now, but I still have a vision of some stairs coming up from the side. Right now it's something for young teenagers to climb up on and thankfully not hurt themselves, but I figured, much like the Whitman one, if you put a stairway out there where everyone and his grandmother can get up there, then there's no big deal anymore. And people would use it. People would go up there. So I'm still hoping to come up with the money and the ability to make the top more accessible. We can never really use it as a bandstand again. There's just no handicapped accessibility. So it's just going to be what it is. But it's Santa's secret workshop. Anyway, I want to move up to the ridge actually from here, and we'll look at the north part of the grove.
So we've changed locations to a different part of the grove. We've come up quite a bit in elevation in this part of the grove, and technically I'm now mic'd, so no excuse to not hear me now. Anyway, but we came up here because I wanted to point out the oldest building in Island Grove. Not long after the town acquired this as a town park in the mid-1880s, they recognized a basic flaw in the whole scheme of things, and that's in a sudden shower, in a downpour, in a rainstorm. Where did you go? You couldn't hop in your car because they hadn't been invented yet, and the train and the trolley were too far away. So they needed a place for people to go to get out of the rain. And they proposed building a pavilion, and they did so. And they bragged at how little money it cost, but we have pictures of it from way, way back, but this is the first building in the Grove. It was rebuilt in, I think, the early 70s, early to mid 1970s by South Shore Votek, and they did some repairs, but it, as anyone can see by looking, is in horrible, deplorable condition again, and desperately needs repairs. The posts are supposed to be red cedar with the branches still sticking out. That's what the old pictures show. And anyway, so it's a project that we desperately want to undertake, and we desperately need funds to do it. I personally have created a framing plan to help stabilize it, but the selectmen are wary enough of it that they have at least temporarily put it behind chain link fence. But we're used to using this for the encampment times like now. The band would often play underneath there. Other gatherings would happen there. Church services have happened there. But this is something that we're hoping to address and restore to its former glory. But not yet. And where it's such an important part as the first building, we hope that will come to pass. We're going to move on from here to what's commonly called the Sugar Bowl, and then to the cemetery, and we'll probably end our tour there. But let's move on to one of our wonderful natural formations here at the Grove. So we haven't moved too far from the pavilion, but I like to point out to people every now and then that all of Abington, certainly this part of Abington, is very much influenced by glacial action. And behind me, looking downhill, this is often called around the neighborhood the Sugar Bowl. It's a natural amphitheater. There's all sorts of stories that Indians met here and had campouts here, and we don't know if any of that's true. To the best of our knowledge, the Indians, the Wampanoags, passed through Abington but never really settled here. They were between Great Pond and Weymouth and Robbins Pond down in the Bridgewaters, and Abington was a passing through area on the, which trail? It'll come to me. But there's a trail that passed through town that approximates Washington Street, and Setauket Path, there it came up to me. It wasn't too far below the surface. So they came through, but they really didn't settle here. So the notion that they had meetings here, probably not. But it's clearly something that came about by glacial action, and it also accounts for the high and the low areas of the grove. The grove, of course, was a meadow before it was flooded to become Jacob Nash's mill pond. And I mentioned that it's been used for a lot of things over the years, and one of them was a cemetery. So to end our tour, perhaps appropriately, let's head over to what remains of the cemetery at Island Grove. To end our tour today, I thought we would come to the northern ridge of Island Grove. It's one of the highest points in the park. Below us is the North Cove, and it was one of the last areas of the grove to fill in with water. Once they raised the height of the dam, parts that had not been previously filled were filled, including the North Cove below us. But of course, all of the grove at one time was privately owned, and not surprisingly, I think for the time, with such a large parcel of land, there was a private cemetery here. And parts of it still exist. Next to my left foot, you can see the remains of a slate type headstone. And there's another little bit of one here to my right. I think there's a third around, I'm just not finding it right now. But this is what remains of the Island Grove Cemetery. At one point, the town closed the private cemeteries, and according to the historical records that we have seen, they moved the headstones. So in theory, we still have burials here, and it's been suggested recently that we actually should put a memorial marker here. I don't disagree with that sentiment. I think we probably should. But anyway, it's part of the legacy. It's been an amusement park, it's been a graveyard, it's been a public park, it was and is a war memorial at the same time. Currently, the town runs summer programs here for swimming and day camp and that sort of thing. So it's an incredibly popular part of the town, and it's been my honor to give a little bit of a tour and some insight to what it is you see around you when you're here. So I thank you for joining me for the tour today.
Welcome to the Dyer Memorial Library in Abington on Center Ave. We are open today from 10 to 2, and we are also open on Sunday from 10 to 2. Everyone is welcome. We have an amazing Civil War display. We welcome everybody. It is open to the public, and I'll give you a quick tour of all of the GAR books. The GAR books are from Abington, Rockland, and Whitman. They were originally recordings and stories of the returning veterans from the Civil War. They've been transcribed. We have them available for you to look at. Again, 10 to 2 on Saturday and Sunday of the weekend of Abington Celebrates. Please stop by and visit with us. Now, even if you don't like all of the Civil War stuff, you have to be interested in the hats. The men's, the women's. How would you like to wear this dear thing? Or this? Or this? We have open crown hats, we have skull cap hats, we have fedoras. We have Abington, Rockland, Whitman High School yearbooks. The Dyer is open to the public today from 10 to 2, and also Sunday 10 to 2. Please come see all of our interesting pieces. Do you want to know where your home was, what the background was? We can help you find that. Come into the Dyer, 28 Center Ave, Abington, Massachusetts.
Thank you.
What kind of cookies are they? We are a band of brothers and made it through the soil, fighting for our liberty, praising our toil. When their eyes were full, the cry was far. Hurrah for the bonny flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, 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 hurrah for civil rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonny flag that bears a single star. As long as the Union was faithful to the Union, like friends and like children, like we were entrusted. But now with all the treachery against our rights to bar, we'll hoist on high the bonny flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, 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 hurrah for civil rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonny flag that bears a single star. From Dallas, South Carolina, and lonely made the stand. Then came Alabama and took her by the hand. It's quickly Mississippi, Georgia, Florida, raised on high the bonny flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, 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 hurrah for civil rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonny flag that bears a single star. And the valley gather round the banner of the king. Texas and Louisiana join us in the song. James I love and Ferdinand and Stephen State are rally behind the bonny flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, 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 hurrah for civil rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonny flag that bears a single star. And is the brave Virginia, the old Mississippi, who with the young Confederacy at length had placed their feet. And held by her example, now others take the dare, to hoist on high the bonny flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, 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 hurrah for civil rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonny flag that bears a single star. And cheer, boys, cheer, and raise and throw your shout. For Arkansas and North Carolina now have both gone out. Let another rouse and cheer for Tennessee be there. The single star of the bonny flag is grown to be a hero. Hurrah, 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 hurrah for civil rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonny flag that bears a single star. And here's to our Confederacy, strong we are free. Like patriots of old, we'll fight our heritage to see. Presidents of infantry that die we will remember. So cheer for the bonny flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, 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 hurrah for civil rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonny flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, 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 hurrah for civil rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonny flag that bears a single star. Hurrah!
Somehow just mentioned the perpetuation.
Oh, look at standing the crowd, yes.
You know, I saw a couple of them leave. I hope they didn't leave because we sang a Southern song.
Share the word.
Sharon sure like, yeah. Okay, sure.
1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, the cat-down ladies sing this song. Do-da, do-da. Come-down racetrack 5 miles long. Oh, do-da day. I went down there with my hat caved in. Do-da, do-da. Come back up with a pop full of gin. Oh, do-da day. Gonna run all night, gonna run all day. I bet my money on a bobtail nag. Somebody bet on the bay. Oh, the long-tailed filly and the big black horse. Do-da, do-da. Ride and track and they both got it caught. Oh, do-da-day. Blind horse singing in the mud. Oh, do-da-do-da. And pitch bottom with his head foot full. Oh, do-da-day. Gonna run all night, gonna run all day. I bet my money on the bobtail nag. Somebody got on the bay. Oh, the muley cow come on the track. Do-da, do-da. Bobtail take her over his back. Oh, do-da-day. Flying along like a railroad car. Do-da, do-da. Running a race with a shooting star. Oh, do-da-day. Gonna run all night, gonna run all day. I bet my money on a bobtail nag. Somebody bet on the bay. Oh, see them a running in 10-mile heat. Do-da, do-da. Round the racetrack 10 feet. Oh, do-da-day. I win my money on the bobtail nag. Do-da, do-da. Keep my money in an old tote bag. Oh, do-da-day. Gonna run all night, gonna run all day. I bet my money on the bobtail nag. Somebody bet on the bay. Gonna run all night, gonna run all day. I bet my money on the bobtail nag. Somebody bet on the bay. Woo! This is me. Hey, we're going to feature our Worcester songbird, Cavalry. Hello. And this, of course, is the famous poem written in 1861, commemorating the death of the first soldier from Worcester who died in the Civil War, Willie Grout. The poem was written at the end of 1861 during the holidays when he wasn't there, remembering his vacant chair, and it was put to music in 1862. This is the song, The Vacant Chair. We shall meet, but we shall miss him. There will be one vacant chair. We shall linger to caress him as we breathe our evening prayer. When a year ago we parted, joy was in
heights of glory. Evermore will deck his brow, but this soothes the anguish only, sweeping o'er our heartstrings now. Sleep today, oh early fallen, in thy green and narrow bed. Urges from pine and cypress mingled with the tears we shed. For we shall meet, but we shall miss him. There will be one vacant chair. We shall linger to caress him while we breathe our evening prayer. While we breathe our evening prayer.
For those who don't know us, we are Shades of Grey. Civil War era camp band.
There was.
Let's go into some Stephen Foster stuff.
Absolutely.
All right. Set. Oh, time is never to leave a brother never home. He's never weary with the rattle of the bone.